We've all seen the salacious headlines full of clickbait-worthy language about AI data centers and how they will pollute the air, land, and water of surrounding communities. Power bills will skyrocket while absentee landlords allow their development to infringe on everything from access and rights of way to creating potential cancer clusters and public health nightmare scenarios. If this is all true, we should already be forming resistance movements to oppose any new data center planning, permitting, or construction. But is it actually as bad as some people are saying? Or are we getting gaslit by those who have an incentive to get us to parrot their propaganda? City council meetings, town halls, and mayors' offices are currently being overwhelmed by AI data center supporters and opponents. Residents, elected community leadership, industry advocates, and even paid lobbyists descend on these meetings to either promote the virtue of or decry the threat of data center developments, many of which haven't even been permitted yet. Some of these meetings have gotten downright nasty, with accusations of kickbacks, corruption, and self-dealing by local politicians. And this doesn't seem to be calming down anytime soon. Verifiable data gets mixed with hearsay, propaganda, and good old-fashioned social media-fueled disinformation so quickly it's nearly impossible to discern fact from fiction. Add a heavy pour of emerging technologies legislators, city planners, and citizens don't fully understand, and it devolves into an epic of emotional arguments that often fall apart under light scrutiny. So what are the big concerns being lobbed back and forth? For the sake of brevity, I'm going to break down the concerns into three distinct categories. First, land use and impact. These AI data centers are almost indescribably large. The Facebook data center in Louisiana sits on a 2,200-acre site with its overall footprint stretching roughly 5 miles long and 1 mile wide. Some have compared it to the size of Manhattan. Facebook's data center is located in Richland Parish, a rural part of Louisiana. Supporters touted the jobs and economic benefit the data center would bring to an area of Louisiana that has struggled economically. Opponents worried about the environmental impact to the area and how that would change the landscape of this rural community. If you can imagine dropping a data center the size of Manhattan on the outskirts of a small town, it's hard not to recognize the impact, both positive and negative. The second common concern is the impact on utility costs. And that argument is simple. If these data centers require massive amounts of power, the infrastructure to provide all that energy will need to be built, and the only way to pay for it is by increasing rates. And this is not a philosophical argument. This is already happening. Northern Virginia has become a hub of data center development in recent years with more than 250 individual data centers in the region. The electric company Dominion has raised rates consistently over the last decade, with another increase approved for 2027 and beyond. Currently, Dominion customers are expected to pay as much as $440 more per year by 2040. Lastly, data centers that take up this much land and displace this much habitat pose serious environmental concerns. These AI and crypto mining data centers have a particularly atrocious track record. xAI's Colossus data center in Memphis uses methane gas turbines to generate power. Meta's Newton, Georgia facility consumes roughly 500,000 gallons of water every day for equipment cooling. But Vantage's VA2 center takes top honors as the biggest potential polluter of them all. That facility uses diesel generators to generate electricity, which in turn drives compute capacity. Turns out, rather than using the diesel generators for the traditional purpose of providing emergency backup power, those generators run continuously. A Harvard-trained research team working for the Piedmont Environmental Council estimated that pollution at that facility's permitted maximum emissions level could impose $53 million to $99 million per year in regional health damages, including an estimated 3 to 6 premature deaths annually. That data center could directly increase the area's mortality rate. The kicker? When the local community found out about this, the regulators in charge of oversight concluded existing law did not give it a clear route to stop the use. And that's how we got here. No regulation, or at least no cohesive intra-agency regulations about how these data centers should be built, operated, or supervised. If you look at how traditional commercial developments are permitted and regulated, it's still a mess at times, but mostly center around issues that are easy enough to navigate. But AI data centers create new and unique problems, and all those problems are massively larger in scale than an office complex or housing project. Need a basic substation to deliver power to support light commercial operations? No problem. 4 to 6 months later, you have all the power you could possibly need. Sewer and water connections? Fairly simple. But what happens when you need gigawatts of power and millions of gallons of water, a whole network of roadways and access points, and thousands of acres of space? Current regulations weren't written with any of this in mind. So instead, every AI data center poses dozens, if not hundreds, of unique, one-off problems that have never been contemplated. And this lack of regulatory framework, combined with communities that increasingly oppose these data centers, has led to an estimated 50% of all data center projects being canceled or postponed indefinitely. Given all this rather abysmal history, why would any town, parish, or community even consider permitting these data centers? This is where we come upon an interesting intersection of inconvenient truth and incentives. You know, one of the best ways to support small YouTube channels like mine is to subscribe. If you like the content and you'd like to see more of it, consider subscribing. Back to the episode. The current pushback against these data centers is based on track records and history. I gave just a few examples of how data center developers or operators have been bad actors, polluters, and terrible neighbors. And that's where most of this opposition draws power from. People have watched what poor stewards these companies have been of the environment and communities where they build these behemoths. I'm a big believer that previous behavior is the best predictor of future actions. So from my perspective, these opponents are on sure footing while making their arguments. But positing that future development will be just like previous debacles misses one undeniable truth. These operators mostly want the same thing their opponents do. Wasted electricity, millions of gallons of water consumption and treatment, reliance on inefficient fossil fuels aren't just bad for the environment, they're bad for business. These mega sites are incredibly expensive to operate, so even a small percentage of resources wasted results in millions of dollars in lost profits. And none of these data centers want to pay a team of lawyers to try and get an injunction lifted or litigate their way to securing complicated permits. But don't take my philosophical argument at face value. The proof is in the pudding, as they say, and we're now seeing AI data center design and planning change in ways that should blunt the fangs of most opponents. AI racks run with very high power density, making traditional room-wide air conditioning inefficient and impractical. Developers are shifting toward direct-to-chip liquid cooling, rear-door heat exchangers mounted to server racks, and sometimes immersion cooling, which means the main sources of heat are actually submerged in cooling tanks. All of this is designed to remove heat closer to the source rather than using enormous volumes of chilled air, requires less power, and it's more efficient. Data center developers are increasingly treating freshwater dependence as a site selection and permitting risk, especially in water-stressed regions. Current designs prioritize closed-loop cooling, air-cooled or hybrid systems, reuse of treated wastewater or reclaimed water where viable, and cooling controls that minimize evaporation during drought or peak demand conditions. According to IBM, developers are improving server utilization through virtualization, consolidation, workload scheduling, power capping, and software that moves work among servers or regions based on utilization, heat, energy price, and grid conditions. And that matters for AI because facilities consume power even when underutilized. Better scheduling raises the productive output per GPU and per megawatt, allowing the company to postpone capacity expansion, reduce CapEx per unit of compute, improve margins, all because they use less power. Rather than build a full-sized campus years before it's needed, developers are increasingly planning modular, phased designs which include prefabricated electrical rooms, cooling modules, and data halls that can be added as customer demand and power capacity materialize. This simultaneously avoids overbuilding and gives utilities time to build interconnection infrastructure more rationally. And this isn't science fiction. All of these strategies are being developed in full or in part by Google, Microsoft, Amazon Web Services, and yes, Meta. These are just the household brand names. A dozen data center development companies are now offering all of these approaches as build-to-suit options for AI and data center operators. So there's the inconvenient truth. Opponents and operators have more overlapping interests than most people understand or are willing to acknowledge, which leads me to the issue of incentives. Subscribers to this channel know I talk about incentives a lot. I believe almost every behavior or action can be tied back to a real or perceived incentive. Doing X leads to Y, where X is the action and Y is the outcome sought. And that's worth a deeper dive when it comes to data center opposition. First, let me state that most of the concerns opponents bring up are rooted in truth, even if it's a touch outdated at times. The following isn't intended to take away from that fact, but there are people using the negative sentiment about AI data centers to push alternate agendas. Some data center advocates explicitly connect opposition to data centers with opposition to AI surveillance, automation, job displacement, and the political power of big tech. Even a cleaner, water-efficient data center may still be objectionable because it enables more AI deployment. Then there is the not in my backyard or NIMBYs. Homeowners and local groups may sincerely worry about traffic noise, land conversion, and property values. But those concerns can function as a not near me objection, even if the same people rely on the same cloud and AI services that need these facilities to provide those services. They just don't want them built in their neighborhoods. Gallup found that opponents commonly cite resource consumption, pollution, quality of life effects, land use preferences, and economic costs. Research completed by Brookings uncovered that data centers can become a useful symbol for broader anxieties, including corporate subsidies, deregulation, concentrated wealth, distrust of technology firms, climate policy, or artificial intelligence itself. Brookings notes that public resistance is also fueled by mistrust of big tech and AI's perceived impact on jobs and social power. And finally, those nonprofit and advocacy groups pushing against data center development have their own incentives. Advocacy organizations gain members, donations, media visibility, litigation opportunities, and political leverage by organizing around visible local controversies. This isn't proof of bad faith, it's how advocacy works. But it means a group may favor a hard stop campaign over a negotiated design that reduces impacts but allows construction. The bigger and scarier the boogeyman, the more likely they are to increase donations and membership. I'm not excusing the past behavior of these operators and developers. There are legitimate concerns to be raised, and data centers can be a source of very real anxiety for the communities where they are developed. Listening to the repeated talk tracks across social media and local news coverage, you can hear hints of these ulterior motives, and to me, that needs to be recognized and acknowledged to make sure legitimate concerns aren't being diluted by adjacent and competing agendas. Now, I know that's going to piss off anyone that has one of these data centers being developed, planned, or permitted in their community, that I'm pontificating on issues that I'm not personally navigating, and I recognize the disconnect here. But for those that are ferocious opponents of these data centers or the associated concerns of AI proliferation, it's important for you to be heard, and you deserve to have your concerns addressed. Unfortunately, much of this opposition is haphazardly organized and aren't solution-oriented. When the main talking points insist that nothing gets built and no permits are issued under any circumstances, that argument is unlikely to be successful. Alternatively, I suggest focusing on specific solutions your local politicians and regulators can actually consider. First, seek guarantees or requirements from the Public Utilities Commission or Oversight Board that utility infrastructure specifically required to support these AI data centers are paid for by those developers and not passed on to existing ratepayers. Second, push for requirements that all water-based cooling is provided via closed-loop systems with serviceable periods no less than 7 years. 7 years is the time frame Google has already said its cooling system is capable of, so start there. Or insist on direct-to-chip cooling or limits to the amount of water that can be used for evaporative cooling. Third, include agreements where developers are on the hook to develop some land for public use. You want a 2,200-acre data center? Great. You're on the hook for developing a 100-acre park for the community or a wildlife refuge or community center. Short of that, what's the reclamation agreement should the project stall or be abandoned? Are the developers on the hook for reclamation costs and work to return the land to its previous state that's now occupied by an unfinished project? Fourth, require annual third-party environmental studies that the developers pay for. Any violations of local environmental codes or regulations are fined immediately. Lastly, make commercial polluting much more expensive for everyone by increasing fines for not meeting those regulations. Now, here's the bad news. This won't be easy. I spoke about incentives and incentive structures for the developers and opponents of data centers, but I haven't yet talked about the incentives for your local mayors, city councilors, county councils, or parishes. They want these data centers because they represent economic development. They swoon at the notion of new jobs, new infrastructure, an expanding tax base, and technology companies spending billions to build data centers in an underutilized tract of land. Now consider there are hundreds of small towns and community officials that desperately want to land these projects, so the site selection offers get pretty spicy. Tax rebates, land grants, development subsidies, civil engineering projects to support the site, all are thrown at the feet of these developers to try and win the bid for these data centers. If you've ever wondered why you feel like you're pushing string up a hill while voicing your concerns, this is why. So which is it? Data centers are bad and we should push back against them, or they're not evil incarnate and actually share more incentives with opponents than most people realize? Well, both actually. At some point in the not-so-distant past, we as a citizenry became binary in our thinking, in our opinions, and even in our advocacy. There are good guys and bad guys, good ideas and bad ideas, and nothing in between. The proliferation of data centers is neither inherently good nor inherently bad, but they aren't going to slow down either. Once we start exercising a less entrenched, less binary way of thinking, the solutions are likely more obvious, more mutually beneficial, and more palatable than we once thought possible. That's it for this episode. As always, like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.